now that the porcelain's been baked and has an approximate shape, before we do a second or third bake, we need to reduce any excess porcelain. There's a variety of stones and diamonds that can be used for this task. If you're grinding a large surface, obviously we're going to use a larger stone. If it's a smaller surface, we'll choose something smaller. If we're going into the occlusion, we'll use a small, plain, or tapered stone. Usually they're green stones for ceramics. These are all long shanks, so they're for the slow speed handpiece. Over here we have small white stones that are used on the high speed. Also for grinding, they're all composed of aluminum oxide. We can also grind our porcelain using a carbide, or we can use this one's a carbide. Or we can use a diamond. We can use a tapered Fisher diamond, or we can use a bud or flame shaped diamond. The carbides are hardened steel. I prefer the diamonds. They give you a nicer surface. As the carbide wears down, it leaves black marks, so I prefer not to use that. They come in small packages of 6 to 12. Be careful because they're expensive. If you're doing a bridge and you want to open an embrasure or an interproximal, you can take a single or double edge lightning discs. They're rather expensive, so they're in individual packages. So be careful with them. If you bend them, they can't be used again. So these are single-sided, so all the cutting is occurring on one side. If you flip them over, you see that there's no diamonds on the other side. Although they do make double-edged diamonds, lightning discs that you can use to grind both surfaces at the same time. So to shape the porcelain, depending what you're doing, decide on which stone you want to use. Insert. Look at the other central, look at your central. If you notice, this one has more of a rounded texture, whereas the one that was just fabricated is relatively flat. The length is okay, but slight reduction just coming down to the midline to try to duplicate or simulate what the adjacent natural tooth has. Porcelain is a very poor conductor of heat, as you remember from your dental materials class, so take your time. Just touch it, stop, let it cool for a second, apply no pressure or it will crack, and then you're going to wind up stripping the crown and starting all over again. So taper it. Again, large surfaces, large stone, small surfaces, small stones. Stop, look. Now come over to the lateral. If you notice, the lateral has a flat incisal edge. It has a flat slope dropping off to the distal. It has a flat slope dropping off to the mesial. If you look at this one, unfortunately, it was done completely flat. So the only way to do this, leave the center part alone, straight line on the distal, straight line on the incisal, straight line dropping off. So now you have 3 separate surfaces. This one is probably going to require another bake because the initial buildup was not correct. It's easier to take your time, do it correctly, do the adjustments in the unfired porcelain instead of trying to do it now. Because if I make the littlest mistake, it's going to have to be done over. So it's 3 separate surfaces. Also, if you see anything on the labial surface, you can go over the larger surface. But again, take your time, hold the crown in place, very, very light pressure. If this was a bridge, you would be bouncing back and forth between multiple teeth. Don't stay on one tooth. You're going to generate heat and it's going to crack. If you notice, there's a very small bubble down in the cervical third. But that bubble does not go all the way down to the metal, so it's just in the surface porcelain. On something like that, we can apply a small amount of porcelain on the next bake, refire it, and it's probably going to be fine. But if that bubble goes all the way to the metal, that means the contamination is in the metal. The porcelain has to be shocked off, totally stripped, metal reconditioned, and done over again. So lastly, let me stop for a second. Okay, let's plug this in. Okay. They were all long shank burrs and stones. Now we can switch over to a high speed. Insert it into the handpiece. Which one is this? Okay. Insert it into the handpiece. Push it all the way in. Very, very light pressure. And this can be used to adjust your occlusion. So if I have to adjust anything on the occlusal surface, if I want to touch up the triangular fosses, if I want to make slight adjustments on these secondary developmental grooves, this can be done with the white finishing stone, it can be done with a carbide, it can be done with a diamond. Right now you probably cannot see the detail, but once the staining and glazing is done, the various colors will sink down into the primary and secondary grooves, and it'll become much more obvious, which we'll do in the next video. So it's a matter of doing adjustments within limits. If the doctor gives you the 1.5 to 2 millimeters, you have plenty of room to play with it. If the doctor does not give you the room, then you have to inform him that there's insufficient room and that you'll do your best. You'll do your carvings, you'll get as deep as you can, but you may not be able to simulate what he wants. So the patient would have to know that. Also, let's get this open. On a case like this, a 3-unit bridge, if you wanted to do an embrasure, an occlusal embrasure, you could take your lightning disc to make the teeth look more individual. Very, very lightly, one straight cut, come around to the buccal surface, follow the porcelain, all the way down the buccal, onto the occlusal embrasure, slightly onto the lingual surface, and again, this can only be done with a lightning disc. All the other ones are too fat. And if you look very carefully, they have much more of an individual look to them. Instead of looking like a bridge, they look like 3 single units that are all touching. Once it's stained, if we use a little bit of an orange-yellow stain into that area, it'll create a shadow, which makes it look even more individual. And this bridge should come out pretty nice once it's done. Be careful with the lightning disc. If you bend it, that's the end of it. It can't be reused, and they're rather expensive. So what have we there? Lastly, next time we'll talk about staining and glazing, but these instruments that look like stones are not. They're rubber wheels that are impregnated with diamonds, and what this is for polishing porcelain. This is a complete kit from Brasler, various shapes where you can go over the porcelain and polish it instead of glazing it. It gives it a whole different texture. There's a pre-polish and a high polish, so then you don't have to glaze. Some technicians do both. They'll polish it and then glaze, or you can just polish it if the shade's on and you don't need to adjust the color.
And can you explain this whole gadget?
Okay. Lastly, newest little toy. I think you all know that on a handpiece you can only put in a long shank. You cannot put something like this. This goes into the high-speed handpiece. But we just realized there's a new type of a chuck where you can place the high-speed burr into the shaft, and then you can take the shaft and put it into a regular low-speed, lock it in place, and now that high-speed burr can be used in a low-speed handpiece. So it's a little adapter. If you look carefully, there are grooves cut in the top of it. And what happens is once you place it into the handpiece compresses the grooves and applies just enough pressure, because right now this burr is moving in and out. But as soon as I place it into a handpiece and apply the slightest pressure, now the burr doesn't come out anymore. So therefore I can use high-speed burrs in a low-speed handpiece. So now any of these diamonds or anything else that I have, any of these finishing stones, I can take these stones and now put them and use them as low-speed instead of high-speed. So therefore I don't generate as much heat. Again, this can be used on all ceramics. So whether it's a PFM, whether it's single units, whether it's a bridge, whether they are pressables from the Avanti porcelain that was just pressed out yesterday, same finishing instruments for